If not, we'll just go ahead and get started. So the big thing to remember from this 121.629, just as a refresher, is icing conditions. So we're not allowed to dispatch into severe, whether known or forecasted icing, right? And did he go over what icing is so you guys have an understanding of what that is when we say icing? Yes, no?
He said literally any type of ice accumulations on the wing or any part of the aircraft.
Yeah, so just for an example today, I got to jump seat into Aspen, Colorado. This is one of our, we call them SAT-4 airports. And it was raining in Salt Lake today. Now, in Salt Lake, we've had, it's like off and on, bad weather, good weather, bad weather. But what we consider icing conditions is when it's less than 10 degrees Celsius, and I'd like you guys to write this down. It's 10 degrees Celsius or less, and there's visible moisture, whether that be precipitation, mist, fog, clouds, any of that. And so today, as we were taxiing out to the runway, it was 2 degrees outside and it was raining, so we had to de-ice. Just spray the wings down with a fluid that knocks all the ice off the airplane and then keeps it off for a certain period of time, and long enough for us to get off the ground. And then the aircraft's anti-icing takes care of it from there. But on the ground, if there's any ice or any accumulation of moisture, it changes the shape of the wing and negatively affects the lift of the wing or the performance of the aircraft as much as 60% for just like frost. There's also another example. In my flight training, I worked with a guy that flew for Millionaire. It's now known as TAC Air up here in Salt Lake City, but they fly business jets, those really high-end corporate jets and stuff. He said there was one day that part of the wing was, it was a pretty brisk morning. Part of the wing was out in the sun. The other part of the wing was, half of the aircraft was out in the sun. The other half was in the shade. In the shade of the hangar when he got out to the airplane, and they decided to go ahead and take off. And he said first of all, the takeoff roll was extremely long, but then as soon as they got off the ground, he said it felt like somebody like King Kong grabbed the wing that had just a little tiny layer of frost on the wing. It was like dew, Felt like King Kong grabbed the wing and like cranked on it. They almost lost control to the point where they crashed, Luckily, they were able to recover. It took pretty much everything they had, but that's just a thin layer of frost. So, I mean, it's pretty amazing what it can do to the aircraft,
So can you repeat that you asked us to write down one more time just to make sure we've got it?
Yeah, so icing conditions, Whenever anybody asks you about, what constitutes icing conditions, it's when the temperature, the outside air temperature, is 10 degrees Celsius or less, and there's visible moisture.
So question, if there was frost when you left Aspen, and this paragraph A says no person may dispatch or release an aircraft, continue to operate an aircraft, or land an aircraft when in the opinion of the pilot command icing conditions are expected or met that might adversely affect the safety of the flight. What allowed them to dispatch that airplane to Aspen?
Well, they just have to go through the de-icing process. So I don't know if anybody's been in an airplane when they've had de-icing. But basically so first of all, the aircraft's equipped with anti-ice. So the leading edges of the wings and the engine cowls have this metal surface on them. Let me see if I can pull up a quick picture of the CRJ 700 so you can see what I'm talking about. But okay, can you see this silver edge of the wing here? Oh,
Yeah.
I think I need to just go ahead and show you guys my whole screen here. Okay. You guys see this silver edge of the wing? And then this silver part around the engines, just that shiny chrome. That's, they route, it's called bleed air that we'll talk about. They route that to the leading edge of the wing. So it's pulled off of the engine where it's really, really hot. And they run that air to the leading edge of the wing here and the engine cowls so that ice won't accumulate on those surfaces. So that's our primary line of defense in icing conditions. Also, the windshields are heated electrically, and then there's all these probes on the side of the aircraft, all these antennas and probes and stuff. They also heat those electrically. So that's kind of the first line of defense in icing conditions. Now, the second line of defense, let's see. This is a 747 getting de-iced here. Let's see if we can get it bigger. There you go. You can see these guys in these little lifts here, and these nozzles are spraying at de-ice. It's almost like an antifreeze onto the aircraft. And they'll spray that on the wings. You can't get it into the engines or up onto the windshields or anything. You just spray it on the wings of the aircraft, and that allows them to take off. As long as they take off within a certain amount of time and there's no ice accumulation, they can take off. And they actually check the wings too. You'll see sometimes when you're sitting in an airport and it's wintertime outside and maybe snowing pretty heavily, you'll actually see the first officer before they even start. They'll taxi to the runway after getting de-iced, and the first officer will even then come out of the cockpit, walk down to where the emergency row is, where he can see the leading edges of the wing, and he'll look out and verify that there's no ice on the wings, and then go back up into the cockpit, and then you guys take off. So once it's been de-iced, then the ice won't adhere to the aircraft, but once you're in the air, the leading edges being heated like that, that's the only concern really with icing when you're actually in the air, is the leading edges of the wing and the engine cowls, and that's why they're heated, so the ice won't accumulate on the rest of the wing as long as the leading edge of the wing is heated to the point that it is. So so we can still fly through icing conditions, because I mean, you guys will learn what a standard lapse rate is, or an adiabatic lapse rate. You'll learn it gets really, really cold really, really quick the higher you get. And a lot of the clouds that we fly through, that's visible moisture. And so, we're constantly flying through these icing conditions. It's just we have to have the equipment to keep the ice off the aircraft. So in Salt Lake, when we got de-iced, that allowed us to take off. But in Aspen, there wasn't actually any icing conditions. It was a beautiful day in Aspen. Nice, sunny, bright, warm. It's actually a little warmer than it is here. So, yeah. But, if it's severe icing, like if the ice is building up faster than the airplane can get rid of it, that's a really bad thing. So, there's actually been a couple airline accidents that we'll read about that were caused by icing on an aircraft. So, yeah, bad stuff. So if it's known or forecast, so if there's a forecast saying that there's severe icing in this area, then we can't fly into it. Now, I shouldn't say forecast. So if there is a forecast saying there's severe icing in this section, then you can fly through it as long as there's no reporting of severe icing. That's what I really mean. So you can actually still fly through those areas, but as soon as there's severe icing, the pilot has to exit that as quickly as possible. So can't really stay in those conditions. So here's a description of what they're talking about here. So how the certificate holder determines that icing conditions such as frost, ice, snow may reasonably be expected to adhere to the aircraft, and that ground de-icing, anti-icing operational procedures must be in effect. Who is responsible for deciding the ground and de-icing, anti-icing operational procedures must be in effect? And then the procedures. So basically, it's just saying we have to have a game plan for anti-icing or de-icing. So yeah, that's pretty much the gist of this detailed description. We just have to have published somewhere how we handle this. Now, when it talks about the use of holdover times here, holdover times, there's different types of anti-icing fluid. We have a type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. and they each have what we call a holdover time. And what that is saying after the airplane has been de-iced, had that liquid sprayed on it, how long can they remain on the ground before takeoff? So if they haven't taken off within that holdover time, then they have to go through the de-icing again. And to give you an idea of like why that's important is de-ice fluid can cost anywhere from like I want to say it's like $22 a gallon to like $50 a gallon. And so, and you saw how quickly those machines were spraying out that de-icing fluid. It's pretty crazy how quick those charges can rack up. So, so we need to know our holdover times, and we need to make sure that we're, you know, that we're staying within those times. But but yeah, then like I said before, just the rest of this stuff is just talking about basically our plan for de-icing. Now, just to show you, let's see. Oh, right here, GDPM. So this is what SkyWest, when we're talking about this FAR, just to give you an example, you know, of what it looks like. This is just what it looks. This is us meeting that requirement. It's just talking about, you know, referring to the holdover times and things of that nature, you know, duties and responsibilities, etc. So, you know, the pilots will actually reference these de-ice cards whenever they have to go through the de-icing process. So, you know, and this is what we were talking, or what I was talking about when I said pre-takeoff contamination check. So that's where the first officer will actually walk back, look out both the left, right side of the aircraft, and make sure there's no snow or ice adhering to the wings, and then he'll walk back up and they'll take off. So, and referring to that, this is why it's important that the first officer go back and check, is because this FAR states that the check must occur within 5 minutes prior to beginning takeoff. So we have an exemption to where they can actually look outside the windows too. They don't have to walk outside of the aircraft. So All right. Any questions about icing? All right, so we'll continue on. So this is talking about our dispatch release. Now, I showed you guys what the dispatch release looks like. Just a document with a whole bunch of gibberish on it right now, but it'll start to make sense. Some of the information that's contained on it. So this is talking about how if the dispatch release is required to list basically any airport it's intended to land at. So, I mean, that's kind of basic knowledge, right? If we have a destination, we list our city pairs, whether it's like Salt Lake to Aspen, and then we'd list an alternate if we had an alternate. Then this says also that no person may allow a flight to continue to an airport which it has been dispatched or released unless the weather conditions at an alternate airport that was specified in the release or flight release are forecast to be at or above the alternate minimum specified in the operation specifications for that airport at the time the aircraft would arrive at the alternate airport. However, the dispatch release may be amended en route to include any alternate airport that is within the fuel range of the aircraft as specified. So what this is saying is there are times when we do a dispatch release. Let's say, we're flying to St. George, Salt Lake to St. George. We get the pilot, as soon as the door closes and the pilot has ran his takeoff numbers, we call that the point of dispatch. That's the point at which the dispatch release is final. Anything that's on the dispatch release, that's the game plan. Now, there's times where the dispatch release will be past the point of dispatch. So the pilots, they closed the door, the pilots ran his takeoff numbers, we're past that point of dispatch. Up to that point, if if our destination or takeoff airport ever fall below landing minimums, then we have to list an alternate. So we do an amendment to the original release and we'd add that alternate and the fuel burn. But if the pilot hasn't ran his takeoff numbers, if the pilot's ran his takeoff numbers, at that point we no longer need to change the release. It's not required for us to amend the release. But let's say that all of a sudden St. George falls below landing minimums and requires an alternate, but our pilot's already up in the air. At that point, we would notify the pilot, hey, you are now below landing minimums at St. George Airport. We're going to give you the fuel burn to Cedar City Airport or Las Vegas Airport. And that will be the alternate if you can't land at St. George. So the pilot can still continue to St. George and can still attempt the approach as long as it's above landing minimums. But if he feels that it's unsafe, we will send him how much fuel and everything that it's going to take to get to the alternate that we've decided. So Does that all make sense?
So when you say send him the fuel it's going to take to get him to a safe airport, are you talking like an in-flight refuel?
Not an in-flight refuel, but we would do basic. So every airplane that we send out, every single release that we do, we have what we call a reserve. So our reserve is always 45 minutes at normal cruise. So 45 minutes of fuel. And then on top of that, we always have what we call 15 minutes of contingency fuel. And that contingency fuel is it's fuel contingent. It will be used contingent on there being something that they have to go around, whether it be turbulence or, thunderstorms or any reason really. The pilot can use that 15 minutes of contingency. So every one of our airplanes that we ever dispatch will always have an hour of backup fuel, basically. So in the event that he got dispatched without an alternate, and then as he's en route, St. George or wherever our destination is falls below minimums, we will send him how much fuel it's going to take him to get to the now alternate airport. So it's still not necessarily required for us to list the alternate per se on the dispatch release, but it is required for us to notify the pilot of the change and to give him as much information as we can.
I'm still not tracking. So when you say send it to him, you're just talking about send him the numbers. You're not actually sending him the fuel.
Correct. We're just telling him.
You're not literally sending him.
Right. Yeah. We're sending him. So on our release, let me pull up a release really quick.
No, I get it. You're just changing what the actual fuel numbers are going to be.
Yeah.
As opposed to sending him fuel. That I was just confused by the word send.
Yeah. So let me show you guys to help you get a visual here. So this is what he's expected to use, right? He's expected to burn 44 minutes of fuel or 2,700 pounds of fuel. In the event, so let's say that this is blank here. This number right here is it's blank. So in the event that all of a sudden he requires an alternate, and we tell him, hey, your alternate is now salt, the weather here at Aspen fell below minimums, and you need an alternate now. We would send him this information, the fuel burn in minutes and pounds that would take to get to the alternate. We would just tell him, hey, your alternate burn back to Salt Lake is 3,906 pounds. And he would go, okay. So at that point, he could make the decision to continue on to the destination, or if it's not safe for him to continue to the destination, he'll ask for a diversion airport, and we can send him the information of how to get to another diversion airport. But typically your alternate that you're going to select in that scenario isn't going to be the destination, the original origin airport like it is here. So your burn to your alternate airport is probably going to be, 15 to 20 minutes, so we would send him that information. Does that make sense? We're just sending him the information so that he knows, let's say he shoots an approach. It's not safe to land. It's below minimums to the point where he can't actually land. At that point, he's going to look at his fuel and he's going to say, look, we've only got 2,000 pounds of fuel left on board. And it's going to take us 20 minutes to get to our alternate. Just to get to our alternate, we need to bug out and get to our alternate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. We're sending him the information on fuel. We're not sending him fuel.
Correct. It'd be awesome if we could mid-air refuel. I mean, that'd be way awesome.
Yeah, no, that's what was confusing for me.
Yeah.
But I'm good now.
So yeah, that's all that this is saying is we're required to notify the pilot of any changes after the point of dispatch. First of all, we have to list them, but let's say he gets past the point of dispatch, we're required to notify him of the change, basically, is what that's saying. Now, when it talks about ETOPS here, we're talking about extended operations. So we're talking about long duration flight. So like I said before, we don't do any ETOPS really. Very minimal, if any. And so we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because the regulations for ETOPS are going to get really muddied and confused with our basic day-to-day operation. We don't want to. This class is confusing enough. We don't want to continue to add to that stress. So this is the requirements for dispatching to and from fuel refueling or provisional airports. So there's times where, because we are regional airlines, we can't make it all the way to our destination. So we'll stop and we'll refuel at an airport and then continue on. Like we've got a flight, we got a flight from Houston to Seattle. And, there's times where we have to stop in Salt Lake to put on additional fuel, depending on what the winds are doing, or from Minneapolis to San Francisco. And there's times that we actually have to stop and add more fuel onto the aircraft. So all this is saying is that no person may dispatch an airplane to or from a refueling provisional airport except in accordance with the requirements of this part applicable to the dispatch from regular airports, and unless that airport meets the requirements of this part applicable to regular airports. So basically all it's saying is that refueling or provisional airport has to meet the same requirements as any of our destinations. We can't just say, oh yeah, we're going to use airport number 2 or South Valley Regional up in Salt Lake to refuel. No, it has to still meet all of the requirements as our normal destination or departure airports.
Is that considered an alternate, or is that a different section like that it's going to go into?
Yeah.
Like, is that like sorry?
It wouldn't be considered an alternate. This is a planned stop to add fuel to the aircraft. So it's not an alternate, because an alternate we never intend to land it at. An alternate is just backup just in case, but we never intend to land at an alternate. A refueling airport we always intend to land at. It's basically the same as a destination, but we plan to continue on from that destination without changing anything else. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So
Gary, is a provisional airport added into the release somewhere?
yeah, so we would actually, you would see on the release, you would actually see a provisional airport listed in this section. This is our air traffic control strip, so we would actually see an airport listed there. This is our alternate, but in this particular release, but then you would also see a provisional or a refueling airport. It would say like fuel or something. And then it would tell us what airport we intend to land at. So, but yeah, it's very, very rare that we ever do this. I've only actually seen it done once. But it's not completely infrequent. But yeah, it has to be listed on the release, and we have to have our fuel numbers to that airport and then from that airport to the next airport. Any other questions about that? All right, so this is talking about unlisted or alternate airports. So when we actually do use an alternate airport, what happens is we try to get that airplane back off the ground in the air, going to the original destination or the intended destination as quickly as possible. We call that a diversion recovery. But there are times where an emergency is declared. And do you guys remember how I said any airport we intend to land at has to have has to be listed in the operation specifications in a section we call the C70? Does everybody remember that? Yeah, so we have to actually have data and we have to actually be authorized to land at airports. But there are times where we have emergency landings where they have to just get down on the ground and they'll choose any airport. This is talking about those situations. So no pilot may take off an airplane from an airport that is not listed in the operations specifications unless the airport and related facilities are adequate for the operation of the airplane. He can comply with the applicable airplane operating limitations. The airplane has been dispatched according to dispatching rules and applicable to operation from the approved airport, and the weather conditions at the airport are equal to or better than the following. Now this is just talking about landing minimums. So they have to get landing minimums for that airport, for the particular airport that they landed at. Now, there was a situation, it was a while ago, at South Valley Regional. I grew up right off the end of South Valley Regional Airport, and it's on approach to Salt Lake International Airport. We had a 737 make an emergency landing at airport number 2. It's not built for a 737. And when it talks about this, must be adequate for the operation of the airplane, they actually had, and he has to comply with the applicable airplane operating limitations. They actually had to take all of the seats off the aircraft, like everything unnecessary for the aircraft, and put very minimum fuel on board, just enough fuel for them to get to Salt Lake International to get that 737 out of here, because it has to meet those criteria. So you can see the effect it has when we don't go for to a planned airport. And there's times where it's better than the alternative, putting it down into a neighborhood. But if we can help it, we try to stay. We try to only use airports that we've listed in our operations specifications for that reason. So that's where us, supplying the pilot with as much information as possible in the case of a diversion is so important for us. So this is a very important part. When we talk about fuel supply, this is something that you guys need to write down and memorize. So this is one of those ones you want to memorize as close to word for word as possible. So when you're asked, what is the required fuel supply for an aircraft? Your response needs to be to fly to the airport to which it is dispatched, thereafter to fly and land at the most distant alternate airport for the airport to which it's dispatched, thereafter to fly for 45 minutes at normal cruising consumption. And that's what you guys need to memorize. Basically, everything that's highlighted in blue here. Does everybody have it? I'll wait for everybody to let me know they've got it. So. Okay, so the way we remember FAR 121-639 is with an acronym. And the acronym we use, can everybody see what I'm writing? Everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so what bar H stands for is the B stands for burn off. So this is our burn. This is our alternate. This is our reserve. Oops. And this is our hold.
No. Not yet. Sorry.
So I want you guys to memorize this too in association with this. Okay?
Okay.
So this is part of the practical test with the FAA examiner. He's going to ask.
Yep, this and then interviews. This is just something that you're going to have to know basically the rest of your career as a dispatcher. Now, that being said, with the bar H, um, this equals Minto. Oops. Minto. Okay, Minto fuel.
Bless you.
Okay, so you can see here we have Minto fuel here. Now, what numbers comprise Minto fuel? Your burn off, your alternate, your reserve, hold, and in SkyWest, this contingency is not part of Minto. It's not required to be on board the aircraft. The captain actually can refuse this contingency fuel. But Minto is comprised of those three fuels: the burn, alternate, reserve, and hold. And to confirm that, we can quickly add these numbers up and just make sure. 2714, 3906. $89.20, and there you go. So what Minto fuel means is that as the captain and first officer are rolling up to the runway to take off, they will look, let's see. See if they got a good one of that you can actually see the instruments here. Anyways, there's a, oh, here you might be able to see it. Oh man. Darn. Anyways, let's see if I can just cheat here a little bit.
So Garrett, Minto is minimum takeoff fuel.
Yeah. So basically they just look and on this screen, it will tell them how much fuel's in the left wing, in the right wing, and the center, and then in the center tank. And then down below it, it will tell them the total amount of fuel. Now, they have to verify that the total amount of fuel is at or above that Minto fuel line. So, like, for example, in this flight, if they were to look down and see 89.10, they would have to stop. They couldn't take off. They would have to taxi all the way back to the gate and have them add the fuel on to get them above that Minto before they could take off. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So just to show you the compliance with the FAR, this is what we consider burn. So to the airport, which it's dispatched. And then this is our alternate. So, and then this is our reserve. Now, SkyWest is the one that adds hold. Hold is part of our Minto fuel at SkyWest. But to comply with the FAR, you got burn, alternate, and reserve. We just add an extra restriction on there. Is what it amounts to. Super, super, super important.
So the hold refers to.
So if there's, and we're gonna get into that down here when we talk about the factors for computing fuel. But hold fuel is when we anticipate traffic delays or weather-related delays at the destination airport. So let's say that, so each airport has what we call an arrival demand chart, and it tells us how many airplanes air traffic control can physically land at the airport before they're at capacity. So as many as they can get in as quickly as they can while maintaining all the spacing requirements and all the safety requirements. So let's say that they are 30 planes over that arrival demand. There's 30 more planes than they can physically take at the airport. In that case, we would add hold fuel because we expect air traffic control to put them in what we call a holding pattern. You guys remember me showing you that racetrack in the sky on the maps. They will put them into holding patterns to space them out so that they can get them in as quickly as they can. So when we expect there to be some sort of holding at an airport, we can add hold fuel. And that just ensures that the pilot's not going to dip into that hour of reserve and contingency fuel that we've given them. We don't really want to use the reserve and contingency fuel, that extra buffer, unless we absolutely have to. In the military, we called that bingo fuel. But Basically the point at which we have to get the airplane down on the ground. Any questions up to now?
If I may, and I don't know, it may help some. Not too long ago, holding was, and I guess it is today, holding is really for going into the larger airports. It would be a very rare day where you had holding at a smaller airport, say St. George or Cedar City, because of traffic. I guess that makes sense. But notice with the use of computers in the ATC system, they've gone to, as you know, they go to the hold on the ground rather than hold in the air. And I think it's, although it still complicates things, they can estimate how many aircraft are going into these larger ones. San Francisco being one of the worst airports on the West Coast when conditions are bad, say fog or something. But I hope that helps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, oh, go ahead.
Back in the day when I was doing just local flight and flying here as a student pilot, is just plain old understood that when SkyWest is on final, you don't get anywhere near the runway either to taxi out taxi to and hold, or you hold somewhere, extend your downwind flight until they're on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you definitely want to try to stay out of the way of commercial because because of their fuel requirements, And if you're the delay of that flight, you're going to get a talking to for sure. I like how you mentioned San Francisco. So I was just at San Francisco Airport this last weekend. Now let's see. And have very many of you ever flown into San Francisco or seen San Francisco Airport?
Yes.
So San Mateo is down here to the south. This is looking south. But let's see. We'll zoom in here as much as we can. But anyway, San Mateo's just up here at the very top of the screen is where San Mateo Bridge would be. You've got Oakland to the east. You've got the mountain range over here to the west, and then San Francisco to the south. Our standard configuration that San Francisco likes to operate in and is most efficient in is to come over the bridge and land simultaneously on the two runways right here. We call these the ones. These runways here are the 2-8 left and right, and this is the runways that they tend to like to take off from. Now, when we reverse that and we start taking off to the south, or if we have to start taking off or landing reverse of the standard, whichever way they prefer to go at the time, that causes major delays. Their arrival rate goes down from, I want to say that they can do 45 aircraft an hour coming in on these runways, but it drops down to like 28 if they have to land non-standard configuration. So that cuts the amount of aircraft they're able to take in almost in half. Now, if we expect at any point in time that they're going to have to go to a non-standard configuration, then we and our flight's going to be departing, we're going to add hold fuel because we can anticipate that there's going to be a significant enough of a change to where there's a good chance they're going to be holding in the air. Now, San Francisco won't switch to that non-standard configuration, go into that ground holding, we call that a ground delay program, until they absolutely have to. But at the same time, we want to be as forward thinking as we can. So our airplane, we want to make sure that if we ever anticipate anything not normal happening at our destination, we want to make sure that we've given them enough fuel to deal with the situation in the air. We want to give them as many opportunities as we can. Does that make sense? So,
Yep.
so air traffic control, like you said, will try to anticipate these things as much as they can, but some things they just can't, or some things they can anticipate, but until something actually happens, they don't like to start those delays. But Denver's pretty notorious for it as well. Why don't we take a 10-minute break and then we'll jump back on. So that puts us at, let's just say 6:50. All right, all back. So, this next section, we talk about flag operations here. This one's really confusing. Like I said, we don't tend to operate flag operations, so I'm just going to run through this really quick. There's just slight differences in the way they require fuel. So once again, we're going to require to land at the furthest, or at the airport to which it's released. So land at the destination. After that, we're going to add 10% of the total time required to fly to the destination. So we're going to take the burn, we're going to multiply it by 10%, and then after that, we're going to add the fuel required to go to the furthest alternate, and then 30 minutes rather than 45, and rather than being at normal cruise, we're going to hold 1,500 feet above the alternate airport. So that's the big difference. Is it's burn times 10, 10%, then to the alternate, and 30 minutes of holding at 1,500 feet above the alternate airport. So this one, you guys don't really need to memorize this one. I doubt you'll ever get asked this question in an interview or even on the practical. I know you won't get asked on the practical, but it is in the ADX. But yeah, just remember flag operations. The key to remember is the 10% on top of your burn. And then 30 minutes rather than 45. So those are the two big takeaways that I think they ever ask any questions about. Now, if it was a turbine engine, which we don't fly anymore, it would be to fly to the airport and then thereafter fly to normal, or 2 hours at normal cruising fuel consumption. So we don't, again, nothing we need to worry about. And that's pretty much it. This is talking about en route fuel supply for flag and supplemental. Again, nothing to really write down or take note of, but no person may dispatch or release a flight from a turbine-powered airplane with more than 2 engines for a flight more than 90 minutes from an adequate airport unless the following fuel supply requirements are met. The airplane has enough fuel to meet the requirements. Duh. The airplane has enough fuel to fly to the adequate airport, and then assuming that there's rapid decompression at the most critical point. So basically at the top of climb, really. Sorry about that. And this is all assuming that there's a descent to a safe altitude with compliance to the oxygen supply requirements and considering expected wind and other conditions. So once again, not a whole lot that we need to relieve and take from this paragraph, if anything at all. The other requirement is that we have enough to hold for 15 minutes at 1,500 feet above the elevation and conduct a normal approach and landing. Then going through ETOPS. We're just not even going to waste time on any of that. Now, this is just something that's just kind of standard across the board. Fuel to account for APUs. If an APU is a required power source, the certificate holder must account for its fuel consumption during the appropriate phases of flight. So an APU is an auxiliary power unit. You have two main power units. We call those integrated drive generators, or IDGs. And if one of those fails, then we have to run the auxiliary power unit, or the APU, in replace of the secondary generator. When that happens, the fuel that's required to run the APU, we have to account for in the burn. So nothing to really take note of right now with that, but that's just kind of a statement that will come into play at a later time for our fuel planning, and we'll actually tell you how much fuel that is. So this next section, though, is another one that has to be memorized, and I've got another acronym for you guys to help you memorize it. So each person computing fuel. So this is how we figure out how much fuel to put on the airplane. I mean, we know that we have to have burn off, alternate, and reserve. Burn, alternate, reserve. But how much do we know to compute for the reserve or the hold or those other those other types of fuel? So when we're computing our fuel, we're going to consider these four following things: wind and other weather conditions forecast, anticipated traffic delays, one instrument approach and possible missed approach at the destination, and then any other condition that may delay the landing of the aircraft. So, us dispatchers love to hear pilots call in and cry. So the way we remember this one is they always call in to cry about fuel. So this is how we remember our factors for computing fuel. The W, so it's WAH. Wind and other weather, anticipated traffic delays, an instrument approach and possible missed approach, and then any other conditions that may delay the landing of the aircraft. But yeah, this is one that has to be memorized almost word for word. So when they ask you in the practical, in an interview, anything, when they say, what are the four factors for computing fuel? Just in your head, go, wah. Wind and other weather, anticipated traffic delays. Instead of one, I always say an instrument approach and possible missed approach at the destination, and then any other conditions that may delay the landing of the aircraft. Let me know when you guys have that one. All right. I'm assuming everybody's got it. Let me know if you don't. So I've talked a lot about landing minimums, weather landing minimums. This is talking about VFR. So this is just kind of a something that doesn't necessarily apply to us, and it's nothing that we base our minimums off of. But this is telling us that no pilot may take off or land an airplane unless under VFR when the reported ceiling and visibility are less than the following. So for day operations, 1,000 foot ceiling, 1 mile visibility, and for night, we just double the visibility to 2 miles. Now this includes, things like smoke, dust, blowing sand. And in those cases, we reduce our visibility to 1/2 mile. VFR, we don't really apply to VFR. We always plan for IFR. But that's just kind of a gee golly. For you guys. Now, this is talking about IFR, but this is just talking about the standard. This is just anybody out there that has a 121. Now, remember, we can have what we call exemptions in our operations specifications that allow us to operate outside these restrictions, but this just says, notwithstanding any clearance from air traffic control, no pilot may begin a takeoff in an airplane under IFR when the weather conditions reported by the NWS or a source approved by that service or a source approved by the administrator are less than those specified in the certificate holder's operations specifications or parts 91 and 97. If the certificate holder's operations specifications do not specify takeoff minimums for the airport, or is except provided by in paragraph D of this section, no pilot may continue to an approach past the final approach fix, or where a final approach fix is not used, begin the final approach segment of an instrument approach procedure. So, what in the crap does that mean? Let's see. Let's take a look at one of these so-called charts. So let's look at Salt Lake City here. Now, we call these JEP charts, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty about these. But it's talking about weather minimums. Each approach has weather minimums. Now in VFR we talked about ceiling and visibility. Well, in ILS we also will apply those ceilings and visibilities, but our ceilings and visibilities go down much lower than they do for VFR. Remember, VFR stands for Visual Flight Rules. And IFR stands for Instrument Flight Rules. So what this FAR is talking about is we have what we call landing minimums right here. This is saying that the cloud layer, now who remembers what a ceiling is? Who can tell me what a ceiling is?
Basically, the bottom of the clouds above the ground.
Okay. More specifically, though, it's the lowest layer defined as broken or overcast clouds or vertical visibility. And that's a definition we went over a while ago, but yeah, the bottom of the clouds, so that lowest layer, the bottom of those clouds, can be 200 feet off the ground. So the pilot has to break through those clouds 200 feet above the end of the runway. And for visibility, meaning our horizontal visibility has to be greater than 1/2 of a mile. Anything less, he can't even start the approach. So this is our initial approach fix. This IR RON, IRON, is our initial approach fix. This is our final approach fix. This Maltese cross there, that's the final approach fix. So this is where we start that final descent into the runway. So what this FAR is saying is if the visibility or ceiling are below these published minimums at the start of the approach, so this IRRON, then the pilot can't even try to land at the airport. If they're reported above, then he can start the approach. Once he starts the approach, it doesn't matter if they dip below or go above, it just doesn't matter at that point. The pilot can go all the way down to his minimums, this 200 and 1/2. He can go all the way down to his minimums. And if he can see the runway, he can land. Now I showed you guys that Cat 2 approach where the runway breaks out like 10 seconds before his wheels touch the ground. If that. But let's say he can't see the runway, he's going to have to execute what we call a missed approach, and it's right here. Or you can also read the missed approach procedure right here. So he has a specific procedure that he'll have to execute if the visibility or ceiling go below minimums and he can't see the runway when he's at those minimums. So that's all that's saying. We have to use these published minimums for landing and takeoff. So if we're taking off from an airport, and I know we kind of talked about this before, and we wouldn't be able to land back at this airport, then because of these minimums, then we have to list a takeoff alternate, is what we call it, to where if there was an issue getting off the ground, like let's say we have an engine failure as soon as we lift off the ground, or a bird strike or something of that nature, if we're not able to land back at this airport, we'd have to have an alternate airport listed to where we can safely land in an emergency situation. So that's what these landing minimums are used for. Any questions on that?
It seems to me, Garrett, that as I was studying through the Shepherd preparation, that there are certain questions on the ADX that said if a pilot has less than 100 hours in an aircraft, that those minimums are increased.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if Adam covered that part. Let me take a quick look over my notes to see if that's something that we cover here in the next couple seconds. Okay, yeah, we'll cover that here in just 1 second. It's actually the next section here. But yeah, we'll hit that in just 1 second. So basically, the way the weather sources, this just tells us the weather sources that are approved for use for those minimums. So we'd have to use either the NWS or a source approved by the FAA. Like I said before, like I've mentioned before, we use WSI at SkyWest, but we'd have to use one of those sources and we can use the least penalizing source too. Let's say the NWS is reporting 1 mile visibility, but WSI is reporting half-mile visibility. We can use the lesser of two. The less restrictive of the two. So we could use the 1 mile in that instance to tell the pilot that he has landing minimums. The important thing to know is that what the pilot actually has reported to him as he's starting that approach, that's the information he has to go off of. So so the approach light system is what he has to see. And this is a list of things that are acceptable as the lighting that he can see. So if he can see any of this lighting, then he can continue his approach to the runway when he breaks out over the touchdown zone. We'll talk about this Category 2 landings a little bit later. I don't want to confuse you guys right now, but basically there's lower minimums we can use, but we're only going to use, in this class, we will only use Cat 1 minimums, which would be that 201.5 here for that approach. Okay, now let's jump into what Rex was just talking about, what we call a high minimums captain. So if the pilot in command of an airplane has not served 100 hours as pilot in command in operations under this part and the type of airplane he is operating, the minimum decision altitude or decision altitude, decision height, and visibility landing minimums in the certificate holder's operation specifications for regular, provisional, or refueling airports are increased by 100 feet and 1/2 mile. So that's it. That's all I want you guys to take away from this. Okay?
Hey, Garrett,
Yeah.
how will we as dispatchers know if we are dispatching a crew that requires this?
So we have, let me,
Crew support takes care of a lot of that for us.
yeah, so crew support is going to have on our, so it's really hard to
I
visualize
mean,
this.
I imagine that when a first officer upgrades, of course they're not at 100 hours of, captain time doing that. But how, I mean, the SkyWest crew is so large, how would we know?
Right. Let me pull this up really quick. Yeah, this software tells us. I've got it. Let me pull up my email real quick. All right. Let me pull this up really quick. So I just want to show you guys really quick what the actual software looks like. Okay. Can you guys see that H right here? That yellow H. So this is kind of what our dispatch software, this is what our dispatch software looks like. We can see the flight number, we can see the city pair, we can see the aircraft numbers, the air traffic control number. We can see all of the times that are applicable to that aircraft. The ramp fuel, hold fuel, any extra fuel, our max takeoff weight, burn. Like we can see all of that. And down here, that little H, when we see that when we're doing our flight planning, that means it's a high minimums captain. Now, crew support's the one that actually puts that in. But yeah, and there are times where let's see. There are times where we'll have a captain call us and say, hey, I'm not a high mins captain anymore. But we will have planned him as such. Because there's certain restrictions that go along with it, like they can't shoot what we call a Cat 2 approach, things like that. Anyways, yeah, basically, oh, well, it says it right here. but in no event may the landing minimums be less than 300 feet and 1 mile visibility. So there's restrictions to them being able to, they can't shoot those Cat 2 approaches, as I said before, because the minimums are lower. But yeah, when the captain calls in and says, "Hey, I'm no longer a high minimums captain," then we just have to send them over to crew support, and crew support can actually determine whether or not they're still high minimums captains, because sometimes the captain gets confused as to whether or not certain hours have counted towards that, towards that time as becoming, a regular captain rather than a high mins. So crew support is the one that really deals with that. So but yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what you guys need to take away from this, is that high minimums captain, I want you guys to write it down as well. High minimums captains, we add 100 feet to the ceiling and 1/2 mile to the visibility, and their landing minimums can never be less than 300-foot ceilings and 1 mile visibility. So as we look at this chart, if we add 100 feet to this 200-foot ceiling, that gives us 300, and then we add 1/2 mile to this visibility, that gives us 1 mile. So there you go. That's the lowest they can ever get.
Please rephrase what you want us to write.
Okay, yeah. So high minimums captains, we add 100 feet to their ceiling and 1/2 mile to their visibility. And that means that their landing minimums can never be less than 300-foot ceilings and 1 mile visibility. Is everybody good with that? That's pretty much all that we need to take away from this. 100.5, 301. All right. And that's something that you can apply to the ADX when you take it as well. Just any question that deals with the high minimums captain, just know that you have to add 100.5 and that their minimums can never be lower than 301. All right. In conducting operations, the ceiling and visibility values in the main body of the latest weather report control for VFR and IFR takeoffs and landings, and for instrument approach procedures, on all runways of an airport. However, if the latest report, including an oral report from the control tower, contains visibility values specified as runway visibility or runway visual range for a particular runway of an airport, that specified value controls VFR and IFR landings and takeoffs and straight in instrument approaches for that runway. So all this is saying is that we have to have the ceiling and visibility values in the main body of the latest weather report. And we'll talk more about this when we talk about that legal to go, like those little worksheets that I have in there. But yeah, so this is just telling us that our latest weather report is the controlling report, whether it's a textual report or from the control tower. That's the one that's controlling. So as for this flight altitude rules, this one this is really for the pilots. This isn't really pertaining to us. The pilots are the ones that really have to take note of this FAR. So basically what it says is that, for the only thing that applies to us, IFR, right? No persons may operate an aircraft under IFR, including over the top, or at night under VFR in altitudes less than 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle, within a horizontal distance of 5 miles from the center of the intended course, or in designated mountainous areas less than 2,000 feet above the highest obstacle within a horizontal distance of 5 miles from the center of the intended course. So this is kind of like that method 1, method 2 that we went over, but different. And like I said, this is only something that really pertains to pilots. And we covered method 1, method 2 pretty thoroughly last week. So I'm not really going to waste a lot of time on this because I don't want you to confuse the two. Method 1 and method 2 is the important things for dispatchers to know. And we don't, as dispatchers, we don't plan for clouds. The only clouds that we plan for are broken and overcast or vertical visibility above the airport that we intend to land at. That's all we care about when it comes to clouds. Anything en route, we just don't care about as a dispatcher because that's the pilot's job. And we don't know where every cloud's going to be in the sky. So responsibility for dispatch release. So each certificate holder conducting domestic or flag operations shall prepare a dispatch release for each flight between specified points based on information furnished by an authorized aircraft dispatcher. The pilot in command and authorized aircraft dispatcher shall sign the release only if they believe that the flight may or can be made with safety. The aircraft dispatcher may delegate authority to sign the release for a particular flight, but he may not delegate his authority to dispatch. So what this is talking about is everything's done electronically, and we do electronic signatures now, but there's times when the system may go down or we may have issues getting them a particular release. Now, in the event that that happens, we can still have the pilot sign the release in our behalf, but we still are dispatching the flight. We cannot delegate our authority to dispatch. So that means that when it comes to the actual flight planning of the flight, configuring how much fuel it's going to take, all that, blah, 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 that is up to the dispatcher. And if we feel that the flight is not safe or there's a safety problem, we can't just hand over the reins to another dispatcher and say, well, I didn't think it was safe, so you see what you think, or that airlines cannot say, we need this flight to operate, Garrett's too chicken to sign the release, so I'm going to have this dispatcher sign the release. No, not allowed. It's 100% up to the dispatcher that gets the flight. If he feels like the flight is not safe, then he has the call. He has the authority to dispatch the flight. Same with the pilot in command. The pilot in command, if he makes a call that the flight is not safe to operate, end of story. We can't swap pilots. We can't do any of that. Now, that being said, there are times, like I said, where the system won't allow us to actually send the release electronically. So the pilot has to do what we call a verbal manifest, where he actually has to go through or a verbal release. He has to go through and fill out all the information by hand. And in that case, us saying it over a recorded line and then him signing the release in our behalf, that counts as them signing the release. Like, that's us signing the release in proxy. So yeah. But as far as it coming down to the actual dispatch release, that's 100% on us. That we can't just hand off the baton to somebody else because we don't feel like it's safe or any of that. So and that is something that will be on a quiz. The question will be along the lines of true or false, the dispatcher can delegate his authority to dispatch or to sign the release. It'll be one of those two. And you'll have to choose true or false accordingly. So if it says sign, we can delegate our authority to sign the release. But if it says authority to dispatch, then it's false because we cannot delegate our authority to dispatch.
And only the pilot in command can sign on our behalf?
I believe so. I'm pretty sure that's it. Adam, if you're there, you can chime in. But
in reading 663, it does say that the pilot in command and an authorized aircraft dispatcher shall sign.
yeah,
So it doesn't say anybody else there.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure that's what it is the pilot in command, because he's the one that's making basically backing up our decision to execute the flight. So.
And you did say that if it is recorded verbally, that he can sign.
Yeah. So Adam, we're talking about this responsibility for the dispatch release. We're talking about the authority to sign, delegating the authority to sign. Is it only the PIC? I'm pretty sure it's only the PIC that's allowed to sign in that instance. Is that correct? doesn't have a mic right now, sorry. There you go. Yeah, so the PIC has to actually sign it. The dispatcher can delegate his authority to sign it to the PIC. So there you go. All right, so the crew member and dispatch record. This section just is talking about how long we have to. Yeah, so like he says here, when you hit send, that counts as your electronic signature. But in the event that they're unable to receive like an electronic copy, then and have to do a verbal release, then that's when they can sign for us. So this is just talking about the crew member and dispatch records. So this says record each action taken concerning the release from employment or physical or professional disqualification of any flight crew member or aircraft dispatcher, and keep record of that for at least 6 months. Each certificate holder conducting supplemental operations shall maintain the records required by paragraph A at its principal base of operations, and then computer record systems approved by the FAA may be used in complying with the requirements of paragraph A of this section. So yeah, it's just saying that we have to keep a physical record of all of our releases for 6 months. For at least 6 months. And this is basically the same exact thing. Okay, this next part is talking about, we've talked a lot about the dispatch release. I've shown you guys this dispatch release. Now, there's certain things are required to be on that release. As you can see, on this release, there's a ton of information. Just a lot of information. But what is actually required to be on this release? And this is something that you guys need to write down and memorize. There's 5 things. So the dispatch release may be in any form, but must contain at least the following information concerning each flight. The first thing being the identification number of the aircraft, the trip number, departure airport, intermediate stop, destination airports, and alternate airports. A statement of the type of operation, whether it's IFR or VFR, minimum fuel supply, and that's it. So that's it. Now there's an easier way to remember this than this. And don't be offended when I tell you what it is. First one being DAMIT. So when you get asked what needs to be on a dispatch release, and in your head you say, damn it, you'll know exactly what needs to be on there. So, let me erase this really quick. Oops. Oh man. Okay, so for the D, I'm going to make this extra big for you guys. So this is going to be our departure, our destination, intermediate, and our alt. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger so it doesn't fall off here. Is this not wanting it? Anyways, okay, there you go. Okay. Maybe it's my margins. Okay. This one is a type of flight. So this is covering our IFR, VFR, right? M stands for minimum, fuels supply. ID. And the trip number slash. Okay. So there you go. That's how I want you guys to remember this FAR. If it doesn't help you guys to do my stupid acronyms, then I understand. I don't take it personal. But these are what saved my life in interview and practical, like in all of it. This is how I always remember them.
Garrett,
Uh-huh.
damn it, that helped.
Yeah. Yeah, it does quite a bit. I mean, in my head, I always say, and in an interview, please don't say damn it out loud. They might take offense to that. No. But in my head, in the interview, I said damn it. And immediately I just start going through it. I'm like, departure, destination, intermediate, and alternate. Type of flight, whether that's IFR or VFR, minimum fuel supply, ID number or tail number of the aircraft, and trip or flight number. Like, that helps me walk through each of the requirements a lot easier than just trying to remember these one by one, especially using FAR language. Like a statement of the type of operation. Like, That's a horrible way to try to remember something, unless you've got like a photographic memory. So that's why I use these to help us. And while I'm here, I'm going to do. I'll attach these to the Google Drive for you guys. I mean, I want you guys to take notes of them yourself, but hopefully this will help for anybody that's not present currently. Actually, I need to. So, yeah, I hope these little acronyms help out in any way, but everybody got those? All right. So, this last part here, it's important to remember first and foremost the 5 required items. Okay? That's number 1. When asked what is required to be on the dispatch release, if you guys can repeat the damn it, then you guys will have answered correctly. The bonus points is when you say that the weather report has to be attached to it. So weather's always attached. That's all you need to say. So go through the damn it and then just say weather's attached to the release. It's not required on the release, but we always attach it to the release. So that will be those bonus points in an interview. So, any questions on that? All right. Now, this is talking about a flight release. So, like I told you guys before, a flight release is basically a dispatch release, but for supplemental operations. And this is something that we will assist the pilots with at SkyWest, but not required by the dispatcher. This is something that technically the pilot is responsible for as a flight release. But it's very similar to dispatch release. But I'm not going to confuse you guys. It's not necessary to know this part, so I'm not going to confuse it with what we just learned. But there are slight differences. So this is talking about what does the pilot have to have aboard the aircraft when he's flying to the destination. So in the event that FAA examiner is aboard the aircraft or decides to come aboard the aircraft at any point, these are the things that the pilot has to have in his possession whenever an examiner comes aboard. Are these three things. So what you guys need to memorize is that the three things that a pilot has to have in his possession to the destination is he has to have the load manifest, the dispatch release, and a copy of the flight plan. Those are the three things. I don't have any fun acronyms for this. Maybe DLC. Dispatch, I don't know if anybody's a gamer. DLC. Dispatch release, load manifest, and copy of the flight plan. Maybe that's how I'll come up. That's my acronym for it. There you go. I just created that on the spot. Never used it before. But this is, again, a question that you will be asked in interviews or
The load manifest, is that part of the dispatch release? Or is
no.
that a separate?
Yeah, it's a separate document. So
Like carried on the plane at all times?
yes. So the load manifest, let me pull up a flight plan really quick. So in the flight plans here, you guys will see this IFR flight plan packet. So this is basically what it looks like. So here's the copy of the flight plan that we're going to actually fill out in this class. So this is what it looks like. We'll figure out, all the information the pilot needs to know, the mileage, how much fuel he's burning, what to expect for winds, etc. So that's the flight plan. This is our performance worksheet. This is runway data, and this is the load manifest. So this is what we call a weight and balance form. And what they need to know is how many adults are on board, how many children are on board, and what is the total. What's the total weight? And we call that payload. How much is that all going to weigh? This bow weight is the basic operating weight, and we went over that in the release. that's just the aircraft and everything that's required to operate the aircraft. That's the crew required to operate the aircraft. That's the fuel, or I'm sorry, not the fuel. That's the oil. That's all of those necessities. The stupid little seat belts and oxygen masks that the flight attendants use at the beginning of every flight, like all of that's included in the bow weight. That's required equipment on board the aircraft. Everything but the passengers, cargo, and fuel. So that's our basic operating weight. Then we have to figure out how much the passengers weigh, the payload, right? And then our cargo. Then we figure out how much the fuel weighs, how much fuel they have to have on board when they depart, is entered here. We call that release fuel. And then their total takeoff weight is what we see in this bottom box. And this will tell them this index number. We get that by pulling the data from these different sections. Also, like we can see the different tail numbers and their operating weights and their index. All that information's there. And then the flight attendants actually go through on SkyWest operated flights. You'll see the flight attendants actually walk through the cabin and count the passengers in each section and write down the number on we call it a PIN card. And that PIN card is what they give to the captain to tell him how many people are on board. Excuse me. And then this is how we figure out that index, where the weight is in reference to our center of gravity. So that's all that we use to get these numbers up here on this load manifest. And then we have to make sure this is our center of gravity table here, down here in the bottom. With this center of gravity table, we have to use this information, the information we got from this above section, to make sure that the airplane is within its center of gravity limits. And that's what the load manifest looks like. So just making sure that we're not over stressing the aircraft, basically. And we do this for every flight. So, yeah. So that is our acronym for that, DLC.
Could we take a break?
Yeah, definitely. Nice catch. So why don't we take our dinner break here? You guys need 20 minutes or need a little bit more time than that?
20 is fine.
All right. Let's get back on at 8:20. All right, guys. Let's see. Let's finish this off. Let's get done with these FARs. Well, you guys are probably done with them. All right. The only thing that I have left with this what the pilot in command is required to carry with him to the destination is just that, and this is just for you guys to know, it's not necessarily something that's going to be tested on. In fact, I don't think there's a test question in our course that has this, but basically that we're required to keep the copy of the dispatch release, load manifest, and flight plan for at least 3 months. So, and for supplemental operations, again, it's just a little bit different, but nothing we want to confuse with stuff that we've already learned for tonight. This last little thing here is the communication records. So everything we do is over recorded lines. So basically, we're required to keep the communication for our en route radio contact for at least 30 days. So, and that is it for 121. We are so close to being done with these FARs. Let's see. Let me see. Trying to think of anything else that needs to be gone over. Oops. As far as the FARs go. And you guys remember that all of these FARs, there is a copy in the Google Drive of all of them for you guys if you want to go back and look at them. There's a copy on last week on the first 3 days. Now, as far as that goes, the ones on the first 3 days, I felt like that was sufficed. Like, it's been reposted, it's the same information 3 times. So just make sure that if you need to go back and review those FARs, that Adam's highlighted and stuff like that, then that's where the highlighted ones are. On the main page of the Google Drive, that's where you'll find like the whole booklet of FARs. And then remember that you can always go to the actual, if you go to cfr.gov, go to Title 14, and then go to the different sections. You can look at the actual FARs and any of the updates that might have happened to those FARs. So, and that is kept up to date by the FAA. So those are the most up-to-date records if there's any changes. Okay. NTSB Part 830. I just wanted to show you guys a quick video on what the NTSB is even about. The NTSB stands for National Transportation Safety Board. They're the ones that go into like whenever there's been an accident and an investigation needs to be done, they're the ones that actually will go in and do the investigation. So let's watch this video. I've got it posted in the Google Drive if you guys just want to go to the Google Drive. If you go into lesson plans and then go into week 2, and I'm going to put this actually into day 1 of week 2, which is April 30th today. I'll just slide that in there. Okay, so if you go into day 1 and pull up this Word document, you can pull up the link there. Or it's in the chat window. So pull it up either way that you can, and then we'll just jump back on as soon as the video is done. So everybody pull that up and go for it. All right, let me know if you're done. Okay, so just a quick brief overview of the NTSB. What's important to know is if there's ever an issue, say there's an accident, overdue aircraft, or anything like that that happens on your watch, this is the place to go that contains the information about reporting the incident to the NTSB. Every time there is an accident, there's certain reporting requirements. This goes through a couple definitions that are important. So aircraft accident, civil aircraft, fatal injury, incident, operator. Those are kind of good to know as far as being able to interpret some of this stuff. So, defining serious injury, and this is something that is on the ADX, is like serious injury requires hospitalization for more than 48 hours commencing within the 7 days from the date of the injury. Results in a fracture of any bones, severe hemorrhages, nerve, muscle, tendon damage, involves any internal organ, involves second or third degree burns, or any burns affecting more than 5% of the body surface. So, these definitions are good to know because they will help you interpret some of this stuff. Where it talks about when we need to immediately notify the NTSB whenever there's an aircraft accident. Now, what do we consider an accident? We come back up here. Things like that. Oh, sorry. I need to share my screen. If you guys ever see anything where I'm just kind of talking to myself about something, let me know. No, but this 830-2 in the NTSB 830, so NTSB Part 830, this is where we're going. 830-2, this is the definitions. This is what's going to help us understand the information below. So like I was saying before, we have this section on immediate notification. These are times when we immediately have to notify the NTSB field office. So aircraft accident or any of the following incidents occur. So we'd come up here to aircraft accident. What qualifies as an aircraft accident? You know, this. You know, so anytime you're unsure, you know that there's been, you know, damage to the aircraft, or somebody's, you know, due to something that happened on the aircraft, somebody got injured or anything like that. This is where we would go to find out the required reporting period, basically. So, you know, sustained loss of power or thrust produced by two or more engines. So, you know, kind of a significant thing, right? Anytime we use the emergency egress system, anything like that. This talks about the required information that needs to be given. This talks about the preservation that we have to, you know, make sure that if we ever come upon aircraft wreckage or anything of that nature, this is where we would go to know how to handle that situation, the actual physical aircraft itself. And it's really important, you know, things like this where it talks about preservation of aircraft wreckage. It's really important to do that because they need to know how things happened. And the displacement of one item can actually kind of interrupt their investigation or throw them off in the wrong path. So, you know, making sure that we're preserving the wreckage is important. As far as reports and statements to be filed, SkyWest has procedures. I know that every major airline, every regional airline will have some sort of procedure written out on how to handle these situations as far as the reports to be filed, statements to be filed. You know, I know, for example, when we're at SkyWest and we have an accident, if there's an aircraft accident where, you know, there's a loss of life, really anything, and if we are notified or if we were called by the media, you know, we're not allowed to talk to the media, and we need to pass that phone call along to the appropriate person. So, you know, making sure that you understand the particular airline that you're working for is pretty important when it comes to these reporting and statements to be filed. But this talks about the specifics of, you know, within 10 days or after 7 days, or, you know, basically anytime there's an overdue aircraft or an accident, anything of that nature, we need to refer to this document because this is going to give us the specifics of how to deal with those situations as far as reporting to the NTSB. And that's all we ever do, is we just file a report. And 9 times out of 10, probably 10 times out of 10, the airline that you're working for will have a procedure that they want you to follow to report those incidents. So, again, nothing that we need to spend a particular amount of time on as far as going over this 830 document, just understanding that there are reporting requirements, and this is where we find them. That's really what you guys need to take away from this. and understanding that this is where we find the definitions for for NTSB related incidents. So now that being said, we are going to go over to help us understand the importance of the NTSB. We are going to go over actual aircraft accidents and incidents that have happened. In the video, it talks about these. It talks about these NTSB investigations that were done on aircraft accidents that happened where there was a substantial loss of life, and the things that the NTSB implemented through the FAA to reduce the number of accidents. Now, we're going to go over some of the crashes that were actually part of them, making these changes. So, and remember that all of these documents, if you go into your Google Drive and you go to this FAR section doc, this is where you can find all the original documentation. So this is part 65. Then we got 121 that it goes through. And then at the bottom is the NTSB. NTSB 830 at the bottom of this document. So this is where you guys will find it in the Google Drive. Did everybody see how I found that? But this is good for you guys to go back and reference every once in a while, just to stay fresh on, some of this. I do recommend that you guys read this, just if you have some time, over the next couple days. Just give this a quick glance over. Nothing that you guys are, as far as the practical or an interview, that you guys are really going to be required to remember, but having an understanding of the NTSB and the part they play in aviation is what's important here, and knowing to go to this document in the event that you have any of that stuff happen. God forbid. But that being said, we have now completed the absolute hardest week to get through. And it took a little bit longer, as you can see, but we'll make up some of that time. Some of these future subjects don't require the amount of time that we've allotted them, and that's what we said about this course outline, is it's dynamic. So this is just to kind of keep us in check and make sure that we're covering all aspects. So so now we're going to get into actual navigation. So we will talk about real quick. We're going to talk about some of these just to finish off the time when we're talking about time, reference, and location here. So let's go. We talked about the universal time code. So everything that we do in aviation is ran off of the universal time clock. And as you can see here, this is a map showing us the universal time clock and our deviation from universal time in the different time zones. So 0 hour, as you can see, is what runs through. This is the Greenwich, England, which is somewhere about right here. is 0 hour. That's what we use for universal time, or as we refer to it as Zulu time. Now, the reason why we use universal time is because it doesn't change according to our location. Universal time is universal. It's really confusing when you have to convert to East or to Pacific time here, and you have a flight that goes from San Francisco, let's say, right about here, to JFK over here. You know, you're like, well, that's a difference of 3 hours. And then the total flight time was 5.5 hours. So I've got to take away 3 hours, I've got to add 3 hours and then onto my 5.5 hours. And then what does that convert to local time? It's just way too confusing. And, pilots and dispatchers, as much math as you think we do, we don't like to do math. So we're going to make it simple and do Zulu time because that takes all of the math out of it. It's a lot easier to run everything off of Zulu time and then just subtract for local time if you need to. Not required, but if you need to. Or you can just look at a clock. But that's the reason why we use that Zulu time. Now, how that applies to navigation is, like I said before, this is how we keep track of our time over certain points. So let's go to SkyVector. As you can see, I go to SkyVector quite a bit here throughout the course. Now, this is something that we will be using for our flight planning to help you guys through flight planning. But the reason why we want, and the reason why universal time code is so important is because as we're, flying from point to point, we need to be able to reference where the aircraft is supposed to be as it passes over certain points so that we know if we're on or off course, by how much. Back in the day when they were using those cement arrows and light towers, being able to backtrack from your last known position by using time was a lot easier than just kind of guessing, licking your finger and sticking it up in the air. It's using time to cross and to cross these checkpoints or waypoints is going to be a lot more efficient. So as you can see on our flight releases, you can see these IFR flight plans. And over on this side of the flight plan, referring to this section right here, we can actually see our estimated time, whether that time be en route, arrival, or remaining. So ETE is time en route, ETA is estimated time of arrival, and then ETR is estimated time remaining. But if we look here, we can see the ETA. So this is Salt Lake City, and we're going to this checkpoint, this LEETS, or this waypoint. This is telling us how much time is it going to take us en route, and how much time we have remaining in the flight. As we go from point to point, we're using this time. And this gives us a longitude and latitude to refer to. So time and distance. You guys remember the calculation in school? Time, rate, and distance problems. My wife absolutely hates them. But what was it? Distance equals times rate. No. Is that right? And I've already forgotten, and it's only been a couple weeks. Anyways, we're going to use that equation a lot. I sound like an idiot, but anyways, we need our time, rate, and distance. So time equals distance times rate. So sounds wrong. Anyways, I'll have it all worked out. Have faith in me. Anyways, that's how we figure out where we're supposed to be point to point. And back in the day, and Rex, you probably remember using what we call pilotage or dead reckoning. You know, this,
Yeah.
that's kind of how we used to navigate, or using VFR. That is how we navigate. We just kind of plan going from here to here, plan the amount of time it takes to get there and the distance it takes, and we know how fast we're going. We know that from here in 20 minutes we're supposed to be over that point. That's what we call pilotage or dead reckoning. But did you get to use that very much, or?
Yes, on any of the flight planning that we did for short or long cross country.
So that's going to help you out, when we actually do our flight planning, because it's not much different. I mean, we just use different charts. But
Please don't get the impression that I was any good at it.
No, it's just a little bit of practice and you get used to it again. But the next thing that we want to go over, and this is something that we'll go over a little more in depth. We're kind of running out of time, so I don't want to get too in depth with this. I want to start fresh tomorrow, but is using these charts. And we're just going to do kind of a crash course on these charts. But know that we are coming back to these charts. So any information that you learn about navigation over the next week is all stuff that is very important and pertains to the flight planning course or section of the course at the end. So, we need to make sure that we take good notes, because it will help you when we actually go into flight planning. But basically what I want to cover tonight is the different charts. And I know that we kind of touched them a little bit earlier, but we have, for IFR flight planning, we have two different charts that we use. We're never going to go into the Salt Lake terminal chart or any of the terminal charts or any of the VFR charts. as far as the terminal environment, when we talk about terminal environment, we are talking about the immediate area around larger airports. So I believe it's 25 miles. We can see it here. Oops, on the VFR. So this white box here, this is considered the terminal environment for Salt Lake International Airport, and it has its own chart. The chart that it uses, you can see right here, is known as a TAC chart or terminal area chart. Yeah, we don't really get to that nitty gritty. And remember, we never really plan VFR for 121 operations. We just don't do it. Our aircraft are equipped to handle the IFR environment, and that's what we plan for. So these are the two charts that we'll be getting to, is the world low, world high, also known as low charts or high charts. Go figure. So with the low chart, when we talk about low charts, we're going to use, sorry, I'm just trying to get a good view here. Basically, the low chart is for flight operations underneath 18,000 feet. So 18,000 feet or less is typically what we're going to use our IFR charts for. That being said, our high charts are for operations 18,000 feet or above. So, and when I say 18,000 feet, I'm talking MSL, so mean sea level, so the height above sea level. Anyways, the low charts, when we use those, we have three different types of VORs. We have terminal VORs, we have low VORs, and we have high VORs. So when we talk about those are the navigational aids on the ground that we're using for the different altitudes. Now, terminal, as you can imagine, once again, we're talking about the immediate area around a busy airport. A low VOR would be for our low charts here. We're talking about the environment that's, these VORs, the signal is only broadcasting, is only accurate out to 40 miles from the station. And then when we talk about our high VORs, we're talking about being able to send the signal out 130 nautical miles from the station. So, but we kind of talked about what the VOR is. The VOR is the station that sends out that 360-degree signal and tells the pilots where they are in reference to these stations. Looking at this chart, we can see, the different airports. You can see Salt Lake City International, South Valley Regional, Heber City, etc., Provo, etc. We can also see these VORs, they're identified with this label box out here. Each VOR will have its own identifier to help the pilots identify where they're at. So you can see all of that. We can see these routes coming off of the VORs when there's a J in front of them. As you guys can see, these J's right here in the bold black box. That stands for jet route. These jet routes, just think of them as freeways in the sky. This is what the pilots tend, what they'll be staying on to navigate between each one of these VORs. Another thing that you can see, just looking just under these J boxes, the jet route boxes, you can see these numbers in a white box. That's the distances between the VORs. So, like you can see right here, the distance between Rock Springs VOR and the Wasatch VOR is 141 nautical miles. You can also see the radial. If you guys remember that signal, each one of the degrees, we call those a radial. So the 5.5 radial off of the Wasatch VOR and the 240 radial off of the Rock Springs VOR, that's this jet route. That's what we define as this jet route. So you can see these racetracks. That we talked about. These are where air traffic control will hold traffic in the event that they need to slow down the rate of aircraft coming into an airport. Something else to kind of note and to kind of look at, these areas that you can see here. You can see these R and a number. This is what we call restricted airspace. So there's something going on in this area that basically they don't want just general everyday aircraft flying over due to the hazards of what's in this area. So we can see here, this is Dugway Proving Grounds. If you don't know what that is, Hill Air Force Base uses this for target practice. Their fighter jets will use this area for target practice. Whether that's bombing runs or strafing runs. So you got a lot of military aircraft in this area flying low and fast, and you have explosives and things like that. But anyways, these maps are just kind of loaded with information to help us navigate the airspace. Like I said, I don't want to get like too deep into this, but we'll continue to talk about it this week. Does anybody have any questions?
Garrett, those jet routes have a certain width as well, don't they?
Yeah, and we'll kind of talk about that as we go through them. But yeah, when we talk about, whether they're jet routes, we also have, when we look at the low chart here, you can see this one's labeled, these routes are labeled with a V. These are known as Victor routes, but they're, yeah, like Rex said, they're a certain width. They want the aircraft to stay within a certain width of this line, because deviation outside is, you know, they don't want them flying off course. So they kind of box off an area to keep air traffic flowing in a certain area. But yeah, and we're going to get really in depth with this. Just we'll go through and actually identify pretty much everything that you'll see on these maps. But yeah. Anyways, any other questions?
When you're planning for a trip, I know we have to do this manually for our testing, but when this is all of these waypoints are defaulted into the computer, are they not for each trip? So we actually have a what do we call them? Like an air traffic control supervisor. I can't remember the technical term for him, but basically what he does is his job is to set up these routes between different city pairs. He's going to go through and he's going to build routes, and we're going to, yeah, they're defaulted into the computer at that point, and we can just plug in a route and it'll automatically pull it up. That being said, there's times when we need to alter a route in order to route around weather or other hazards. So that's what, I don't know. Does that answer the question? There's also certain times where air traffic control will specifically, we have what are called playbook routes, and we have CDRs. So basically what has to happen is air traffic control to help them with configuration issues that we talked about, like with San Francisco and stuff like that. They'll issue these playbook routes or these CDRs to route traffic through a specific area to help them manage the flow. And those are other times that we may be altering the route. I know there are some times when I've been on flights and have watched flights actually from the ground as well, leaving St. George and heading to Salt Lake. Sometimes they'll head over to the VOR above Tokerville. Sometimes they'll fly north on the west side of Pine Valley Mountain. And I'm just wondering what it is that determines that.
A lot of times that's, what the dispatcher actually plans, or what, when we talk about St. George specifically, there's just each airport will be treated kind of differently from one another, depending on the approach or the arrival. Each airport has an approach and arrival route that they prefer, especially bigger airports. So depending on whether the aircraft are arriving, they'll fly a certain route. Whether they're departing, they'll do a specific route. But then there's variations inside of those. So say like the winds or the weather's kind of, and a lot of it's almost always going to be due to wind or weather is when we deviate from a normal course. But like St. George, we tend to go out to basically they call it the what is it, the Jitka 2 arrival or Jitka 2 departure or Hivka 2 departure. Anyways, depending on the arrival departure that they're using and the direction that they're going, they'll change the route of the aircraft. So if they're going down to Phoenix, they'll spill off and kind of curve around St. George, depending on which runway as well. They'll kind of spill off and come down to the south here, or they'll just fly directly out. If they're flying north up towards Salt Lake, there's times where they'll come out and then come up on this arrival into Salt Lake. They'll fly this route. If they're flying to Denver, sometimes they'll kind of come up here and head over this way. So, it just depends on where they're trying to go, the different arrival routes at the airport. It's all going to change and be subject to a handful of things. It's just kind of hard to go over them all. But when we go into flight plan, well, as we talk about these things today, when I talk about standard terminal arrivals, we use these charts here. So, like the arrival charts, we'll use, the Jammin 5 when we're coming in from St. George. Let me see if I can expand this a little bit. But if you remember that Milford VOR, we'll fly out over, we'll do the Hivka 2 departure, and then we'll come up and connect to this Milford VOR and then fly this into Salt Lake International. But like I said, and as you can see, looking at, didn't mean to do that. Looking at Salt Lake International, you can see there's lots and lots of ways to skin a cat. These standard terminal arrivals, depending on what direction you want to go, you can choose any of these. Or where the weather is that you have to route around, you can choose any of those. And when you're departing, you can choose any of these. So there's lots of different reasons and lots of changes that we can take in and apply. So I didn't really answer your question, but I answered your question very politically. Clear as mud. And we're going to dive into this week, but this is just kind of an introduction to some of the stuff we're going to learn about. So there's just lots of different reasons why we do different things in dispatch, but we're going to learn why we do those things. So other than that, you guys have any more questions? Or if not, we'll go ahead and call it for tonight. But pat yourself on the back. You made it through like the hardest week of the course. So